When it comes to football, the biggest competition is the World Cup. That's the most prestigious competition. It's the competition where, if you were to ask most players what competition would they like to win the most, it's the World Cup. It's where footballing memories are made, legendary moments. Football players become immortal football players in the World Cup. One thing about the World Cup is it's played every 4 years. So that adds to its level of prestige. The fact that it's not every year. So the footballing competition where you can compare to other sports in terms of, like, let's say the NBA, with the NBA playoffs, NBA finals, and then the NFL, you can say Super Bowl. Football's version of that is the UEFA Champions League. The UEFA Champions League, particularly in the modern game, let's say 21st century, has become a club version of the World Cup where most of the best players in the world reside in Europe, and every year they compete in the UEFA Champions League. With the modern expansion of the Champions League, the best players in the best teams in the top leagues play in the Champions League, and every year there's a winner. So if there's a competition in football where you can compare to other team sports, it would be the Champions League, even though the World Cup is the most prestigious competition. I just personally think the Champions League is the standard. It is the litmus test, in my opinion, for high quality football. Football at the highest level. And it never seems to disappoint, you know? A lot of great footballing moments. Like I said, the World Cup produces that, but the Champions League also has its fair share of great moments. And I personally think this competition is the standard. You know, this week, there's been Champions League games, and it's just like, there's a lot of conversations that football is not the same. I do think that's a lot of like nostalgia talk, but there's a lot of competition. There's a lot of conversations about, football not being the same. But what I've seen in the Champions League, Bayern, Real Madrid, the football that PSG play, there's a lot of quality. And that's what you tend to see in the Champions League, particularly in the knockout rounds, where the best teams come up against the best teams. This is where, players, they start making their reputation in football. Two of the greatest players of the modern age are Messi and Cristiano Ronaldo, right? And for a long time, they made their names off the Champions League. It wasn't really what they were doing internationally. I know Messi eventually won the World Cup and became a World Cup legend. Ronaldo's won the Euros with Portugal. But how they became legends in the first place, in terms of on a worldwide scale, was what they were doing in the UEFA Champions League. And if you just look at like legends of the Champions League, whether you want to go off the all-time top scorers, the players with the most appearances, the players with the most titles, the great players, it's always great players. There's no, in the Champions League, if you're a Hall of Famer Champions League player, most likely you're going to be a great player. So I personally think this competition is the standard for high-level football, because the best players in the world reside in Europe. Europe contains most of the best players. And this is a competition where we get to see the best players compete against each other every year. I know there was literally a competition called the Club World Cup, but the Champions League really and truly is the Club World Cup. The team that wins the Champions League, a lot of the time, they're considered to be the best team in the world. Not always, but amongst the best teams in the world. The best players, how awards are decided for the best players in the world. The Champions League usually has a lot to say about that. I'm not saying it's everything. I'm not one of the people that, they just wait for the Champions League knockouts to decide who they think is the best player. I don't think you should judge football in that way. What happens domestically is also important. But I do think the UEFA Champions League is the standard for high-level quality players, quality football. And it's proven year in, year out, through great memories, great moments, great games, great teams winning the competition. If I name all my Champions League memories, we can be here all day. But, that Barcelona team, for instance, the Pep Guardiola Barca team, Enrique's Barca team with MSN, Real Madrid team that dominated in the Champions League 3 times in a row. You know, great English teams, for instance, a lot of the Champions League wins, that's part of their club's history. Liverpool in Istanbul, Chelsea when they won their first Champions League against Bayern, Man United treble 99, and then 08, Man City won the Champions League in 2023. Like, this competition, this is where we get to see the best players in the world play regularly every year. This is our version of like the NBA playoffs, the Super Bowl. This football's litmus test for quality, high quality, is the UEFA Champions League. Even though the World Cup is the biggest competition, but like I said, the World Cup is every 4 years, so we don't see it in a year in, year out basis. So yeah, just to summarize, I just think the UEFA Champions League is the standard for high level football that we see on a regular basis. And this competition just never disappoints. The Champions League is the standard, not the Premier League.